All right, welcome. So this video is a broad overview of the rationale or the strategy behind organizing and conducting qualitative research. I want to preface this short video by saying qualitative research is as rigorous and systematic as what we've all come to say is good research in the quantitative sciences, where we rest a lot of our interpretations on statistical inference. There are frameworks in qualitative research that can help guide how you make interpretations for different kinds of data, for different kinds of questions, for different purposes, end purposes. So it's important that we appreciate that, particularly for those of us in the sciences, in the quantitative sciences, the life sciences, the physical sciences, to be able to get a holistic understanding of a phenomenon, not just from the lab, but also from how that phenomenon affects people and what they think, what they feel. These types of things are not readily measured with typical quantitative measures, like even surveys. They're limited in understanding a lot of subjective things. So, that said, this is a quote from Lisa Bolek's paper in 2017, and she's advocating increased use of qualitative methodologies. Okay. And the goal, the reason why it is that it's important, it's pursuant to critical approaches, prioritize dismantling social structural inequities as a prerequisite for health equity. And so there is a functional, a utility to this research. It's not just to show, what is associated or what's, some insight. There's a bigger goal, which is to lead to some form of change by dismantling social and structural inequities. And so, first, here, what I want to do is to look at the research process in qualitative research. Actually, this applies to all research, by the way. And what this is showing is how to distinguish the word methodologies, which we often take for granted, and it's often synonymous with methods in the quantitative sciences. But in qualitative research, you have to define your methodology and your methods and show how those can help you study your phenomenon. So you have methodology, that's one, and also you have method. So, and I'll describe those. Here it says in this paper that a well thought out methodology that is grounded in robust theoretical framework guides the selection of suitable methods, ensuring that research questions are effectively addressed and that the research objectives are met. So let's look at some of the terms in there, and this is from this other paper. So what a framework. So this group is trying to understand what population-based social factors might account for unhealthy eating and obesity. Well, you could look at that from different frameworks, and those frameworks could be that the social environment influences individual response, which affects health and function. Okay. You can look at it as well in terms of different theories about resources in a social environment, health behaviors, and ultimately health outcomes. So those are things. But I want to say that most research at the undergraduate level is at the conceptual model stage, where you are in very, very defined um, with defined parameters, you're trying to understand relationships between things. So you're looking at neighborhood food quality and factors that affect that, or dietary practices and factors that affect that, and ultimately saying that that's what leads to obesity. To be able to answer this question, so a lot of our research actually happens at this level. We, as undergraduates, it's highly unlikely that we are we are trying to derive theories, or we're trying to create frameworks. It's those are usually the work of several researchers over a period of time. So, but I want to apply that to one question about social factors that explain, how college students cope with stress. So I have to pick a model that explains the relationship between those phenomena. And so in my case, there are different models, and this is one. The transactional model is one. The circumplex coping circumplex model is another one. This has been around a lot longer. So people would have to pick one or two, one of those, and or several others models, because each model has different constructs that they measure. They have different instruments that are used to measure those things. So these are choices that you need to make. And as you look at papers, you need to look at. And then you're saying, you know what, I want to see how individual health, practices or attributes can influence coping in, say, the transactional um, model. And ultimately, you want to see in how that influences stress and maybe depression, how stress might lead to depression or stress might lead to academic failure and things like that. So typically, most of our research it occurs at the conceptual model level. Okay. So what is a conceptual framework? So a conceptual framework is it identifies a set of variables and the relationships among them that are presumed to account for a set of phenomena. So here is an example here of a conceptual framework by Sabel in 20 I believe in 2017 or earlier. And what they are trying to show is that, well, if so this is already known, okay, that self-reflection and forethought and performance control improve students' performances. So what and there are theories that support that. So there are also theories that talked about um, engagement with content, assessment, and those are external factors. Well, these are internal factors. So these researchers wanted to see how a particular intervention, a particular strategy, which is scaffolding, how that might support learning. So this framework, by drawing it out like this early on, it can help determine what variables to measure and how you think it would impact those things. So in this particular framework, this person might be looking at these scaffolds, and how maybe it influences student assessment, or maybe it influences engagement, and there will be different ways to measure those things. And ultimately, as well, look at how, scaffolds can help maybe with self-reflection, and or forethought and things like that. And together, it gives you a new idea on how um, this intervention helps to influence ultimately students' performance. Okay, so yeah, this is they use the scaffolds as an external factor, how that interacts with internal factors to support student learning. That's their ultimate goal, and it includes principles from two theoretical frameworks. Self-regulated learning, there's a theoretical framework about this, there's work about this that the person has read about, and there's metacognition, um, again, and this illustrates how these researchers are creating a new idea and grounding that new idea in what has been known. So your initial readings is what guides which framework you or that you theoretical framework you is most relevant to what you're trying to study. You don't just pick a theoretical framework and say, "Hey, I like this framework." Your readings is what guides you there. Follow the way of water. Don't force water against its not natural direction. So what are methodologies and methods? So methodology is, everything that goes into deciding what is the appropriate means for addressing a research problem. Whereas methods are very straightforward. They are things you use to collect or analyze or interpret data. Those are methods. So, for example, a study that is investigating a new drug for blood pressure. Well, the research methodology is the overall study design, the rationale for selecting this type of study, that is randomized clinical trials, control trials. So that's the methodology. For this example, it will not work to say, oh, I want to see the effect of a new drug by doing a focus group, because it's on blood pressure. Blood pressure is measured using a sphygmomanometer, and that is one way of knowing. It's the positivist way of knowing. It is the quantitative, the deductive way of knowing, meaning you hypothesize that something would happen and that happens. This contrasts with inductive methods that you will see in qualitative research, whereby you are in qualitative research you are discovering. You don't start with a hypothesis or a theory. You are looking into the data to make meaning out of it. Okay, and possibly it might lead to a theory, but you don't start with a preconceived theory. So for example, this qualitative methodology might, which is would you're going to use different methods, so interviews, participant observations, and also how, as a result, how the data is interpreted is very, very different from what we are what we most commonly use. The p-values, the statistics. So in terms of how to interpret data, again, there are different ways of interpreting data. There's again, the positivist approach or the post-positivist approach, where you're coming in with a theory, with a theory or hypothesis, and you will measure something to try to prove that. That is, it's all driven by the researcher, by the investigator. But for constructivism, on the other hand, is you know, you are in constructivism. Realities are can only be apprehended in the form of multiple subjective constructions. It's not just what one sole investigator thinks, but it is socially and experientially based. So it's local, it's specific. So if five of us do use a constructivist approach, like it is what we co-construct is our reality about that subjective matter. Okay. Another one is critical theory. Again, so critical theory here really is a way to generate theory, um, to use theory to critique how the social world is organized. So it's usually used when you want to challenge existing power dynamics. And so if I go to, um, so for example, these are two screen grabs from different um, news articles. So when you hear about critical race theory, for example, it is the body of research that is trying to ensure that minorities' voices are heard, and those they are heard not through the lens of the majority group. Okay, so it's if I put that in as an example, uh, a professor is the one who controls what happens in a class. Students would do less so, and so critical approaches are saying, well, we want to hear what students think, not just what the professor sees. Okay. Okay, because the goal of Lisa Bullock's work is to dismantle those social structural inequalities. That's why she picks critical theory as one of the ways that she interprets data.